The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, 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 like fabulous yellow Roman candle, exploding across the stars, and in the middle you see a beautiful center light, blue, pop, and everybody goes, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Kerouac at the Cathedral. That was a passage by Jack Kerouac, of course. And it's such an honor to be here in a place of worship, of celebration, of literature and music, to celebrate Jack and the Kerouac House and Poets' Corner, who serve literature and serve wisdom and serve history. In history, regarding Jack Kerouac, there were few people with primary source information about Jack's life. Some who are here tonight, and one particular gentleman who's my dear friend, a mentor, and a father figure to many. Mr. David Amram is here this evening. David Amram, Rene Hart on the bass, Erik Lawrence, saxophone, Eliot Peper, percussion, Kevin Twigg on the drums. Thank you. David, take it away.
Tonight we're at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine on Amsterdam Avenue and 112th Street in Manhattan, not too far away from where Kerouac went to school at Columbia University. And we are celebrating Jack's work and Jack's life with his dear friend, David Amram, who's also my dear friend, David. So we'll be celebrating Jack's work, and not only the literature, but also the music of the time. So David's going to encompass that with his performing with the quintet tonight. So this is the 5th year we're doing a benefit for the Project. We started off at humble Cornelia Street Cafe, then we did it at Joe's Pub, and now we're in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, the largest Gothic cathedral in the world. We're here to celebrate Jack. That's really it. Celebrate his work.
Thank you for coming. It's a real joy to be here, to have such wonderful readers who are accomplished artists in their own right, because we're all born artists until we're talked out of it. The first piece we're going to hear is one that Jack enjoyed. I learned it in 1955 when I came to New York. This was the time that Jack came when I was playing with Charles Mingus at the old Cafe Bohemia, although I didn't meet him formally until a year later. Sonny Rollins, the great saxophone player, taught me this tune, and it's based on an old West Indian folk song called St. Thomas. Thank you, thank you.
The Kerouac Project is a writer's residency in Orlando, Florida. It's the house where Jack Kerouac lived in 1957, 58. It's where he wrote the Dharma Bums, and it's where he finished the final edits of On the Road. So he was there at a pivotal time in his life, living there in College Park, Orlando, Florida, in a humble bungalow with his mother. And he wrote a fury there. I mean, he really wrote a frenzy. So the house was rediscovered in the 90s by a journalist named Bob Keeling. He wrote an article about this house that Jack lived in somewhere in College Park in Orlando, Florida. And the article generated so much interest that people decided to band together and save the house from destruction. It was going to get bulldozed and turned into another house. But the hidden history is what Bob revealed. And some people banded together, put some money up to save the house, and with the idea of making it into a writer's residency. And so since then, since the year 2000, they've had 60 writers live there for free. Each writer gets a 3-month residency. So there's 4 there per year. And they get to live there for free. They also get a $1,000 stipend, food stipend. It's a place where they can work and they can write in the house where Jack lived. It's a marvelous place. I've been there. I visited several occasions with David Amram and Joyce Johnson and others. It's a great place.
We actually have a program, which is kind of wonderful. But that does not destroy spontaneity, because formality and spontaneity are linked together. Jack proved that with his writing, and he loved the way people talked and spoke and interacted with one another, as much as he loved the classics of Chaucer, Beowulf, Emily Bronte, all the great English writers of the past and present, and all those people whose works in French he loved, and the great writers and philosophers and poets from Asia and ancient Greece. He knew all about that stuff. I only mention that because here we are at this beautiful cathedral, and for those people who might feel this is the wrong environment for someone who is supposed to be, not according to himself or any of us, the leader of a non-existent literary movement like the 12 Days That Shook the Earth, or the National Association of Manufacturers, or the Trilateral Commission, called the Beat Generation, followed by morbid, mediocre slop. There's plenty of room for that, and no lack of that in our culture. We have more landfills than any country in the world. But Jack, like so many other artists in history, was thinking in much larger terms than being the slopmeister of the month. Therefore, he wasn't worn down by fashions or trendiness because he was trying to be there for all time. And it looks like his writing is proving to be just that. He's translated in languages all over the world. And we're so happy that in New York City, he could be discovered to the extent that here we are in one of the jewels of our culture, all together honoring his words. And that's why we're glad to have a program, because Frank Messina was nice enough not only to write his own poetry and do his own freestyling, but also to invite some great artists to join us to celebrate Jack's love of the formal and the informal, and the fact that art is for anybody and everybody who can either show up or be told about it. So please welcome back the man who put all this together, New Jersey's own unofficial poet laureate, Mr. Frank Messina.
This is a part from On the Road, Denver at Last. And here I am in Colorado. I kept thinking gleefully, I'm making it. And after refreshing sleep filled with cobwebby dreams of my past life in the East, I got up, washed in the station men's room, and strode off, fit and slick as a fiddle. Got me some rich, thick milkshake in the roadhouse to put some freeze in my hot, tormented stomach. Incidentally, a very beautiful Colorado gal shook me that cream. She was all smiles, too. Made up for last night. I said to myself, wow, what'll Denver be like? I got on that road, and off I went in a brand new car, driven by a Denver businessman of about 35. He went 70. I tingled all over. I counted minutes and subtracted miles. Just ahead over the rolling wheat fields, all golden beneath the distant snows of Estes, I'd be seeing old Denver at last. I picture myself in a Denver bar that night with the gang, and in their eyes, I would be strange and ragged, and like the prophet who has walked across the land to bring the dark word, and the only word I had was, wow. 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 The man and I had a long, warm conversation about our respective schemes in life. And before I knew it, we were going over the wholesale fruit markets outside Denver. There were smokestacks, smoke, rail yards, red brick buildings, and the distant downtown gray stone buildings, and here I was in Denver. He let me off at Larimer Street. I stumbled along with a wicked grin of joy in the world, among the old bums and beat cowboys of Larimer Street. Thank you, David. We're going to step into part of the program that's very important. Jack's girlfriend at the time was Joyce Johnson, and she wrote a series of letters to Jack, which he responded, and which is now in a beautiful book called A Beat Love Affair in Letters, Door Wide Open. And so when David and I were putting this program together, we're thinking, well, you know, who should read these? We'd love to include them in the program. Who should we have them? Who should read them? And Michael Shannon, who's shared the stage with David on a number of occasions and been to our events and has been a supporter of the Kerouac project, I asked him, I said, you know, would Kate read Joyce's words? And she's here tonight, Kate Arrington, the great actress. Kate, would you please come up and read Joyce Johnson's wonderful work? And then I could come up also to read Jack's letter, Michael Shannon. We're going to be up here together, why not, right? Is that cool? Yeah. So Michael's going to read the letter that Jack wrote to Joyce, and then Joyce's beautiful response.
July 22nd, 1957, 1418 Clouster Street, Orlando, Florida. Dear Joyce, I moved my mother back to Orlando, leaving me with $33, which I think is a big joke in the family since she wound up around the corner from where we started, and everybody comes around every night to laugh. The review copy of On the Road's unread on the shelf, and now beyond the bugging stage, I'm becoming enraged. So I'm going to Mexico tomorrow on the chance Viking will feed me down there. I saw Elise in Frisco. I was too much for her with the drinking gangs behind me. Everything exploded. I was afraid to write to you. But here's your enraged bum. Are you going to Frisco anyway? Perhaps you should spend your money on fixing a new pad in the village, or come down to Mexico and join me after Frisco. Write to me care of here. I'll reply from Mexico City. In the next 6 weeks in Mexico City, I want to write by candlelight in a solitary room. Think and stare through the wall. My Buddhist friend Waylon advised me to do this, noticing I was being set upon too much by family obligations. It's what I was gonna do anyway, absorb vibrations. So sweet Joycey, decide what you want to do. If you care to join me in Mexico City in September or so, come on down. You can buy a Greyhound ticket straight through from New York to Mexico City. Check your baggage straight through. Lush apartments for $20 a month. I'll be in an $11 hobble myself. Frisco was too much, but maybe you can dig it, and Elise is a little lost, I think. She thinks I'm irresponsible. But no, I'm just sick. Crazy. We got a letter from my sister and had to leave or lost the pad. Now I'm broke, but conscience-free and ready to do some writing. I'll write to you next week from my new address. You got a good advance. In a year, we'll both be rich and corrupt. Jack. P.S. $500 can last you 10 months in Mexico and write all you want.
July 26th, 1957. Dear Jack, yes, I will come to Mexico. I wish you hadn't been afraid to write me. I know you have to do what you have to do, and that isn't being a bum. Don't put yourself down like that. Elise wrote me that you'd left, but her letter was so vague that it sounded as though you were in some terrible trouble and had decided to disappear. And not knowing where to write, I've spent a sad week wanting so much to write you not to disappear and not knowing where to write. So it was just too much to get your letter. I walked out of the hotel with it in my hand, ordered an enormous breakfast that I couldn't eat, and flew downtown on the IRT, which I think I imagined as somehow bound for Mexico that minute. Yes, and I bought a Learning Spanish Phonetically Through Pictures type book and can already say, "Yo soy muchacha," a sentence which I'm sure will come in very handy eventually. I wish it were September. I got a review copy of On the Road, read it, and think it's great. Beautiful book. I think you write with the same power and freedom that Dean Moriarty drives a car. Well, it's terrific and very moving and affirmative. Don't know why, but it made me remember Mark Twain. Ed Stringham has read it too and think it one of the best since World War II, and is going to write you a long letter and tell you all this much more coherently than I can. Saw Sheila off to Europe Wednesday on a little white ship, not much bigger than a ferry boat, full of waving, singing young kids, everybody smiling and throwing streamers, Sheila too, but I didn't know how she felt. It's funny the way you and Alan and Peter came to town this winter and shook us all up. Just think, we had been there all our lives, and now suddenly Elise is in Frisco, Sheila in Paris, and I'm going to Mexico. Most peculiar. I feel rather friendless in New York at present. Miss talking to Elise a lot, especially. She called me to collect from San Francisco this week because she needed money, and we tried to talk but couldn't hear each other and kept screaming, "What? What?" But then I remembered walking with you at night through Brooklyn docks and seeing the white stream rising from the ships against the black sky, and how beautiful it was. And I had never seen it before, imagine. But if I'd walked through it with anyone else, I wouldn't have seen it either. Because I wouldn't have felt safe in what my mother would categorically call a bad neighborhood. I would have been thinking, where's the subway? And missed everything. But with you, I felt as though nothing could touch me. As if anything happened, the hell with it. You don't know what narrow lives girls have, how few real adventures there are for them. Misadventures, yes, like abortions and little men following them in subways, but seldom anything like seeing ships at night. So that's why we've all taken off like this. And that's also part of why I love you. Take care. Love, Joyce. September 1957, from Minor Characters, a Beat Memoir by Joyce Johnson. There was a newsstand at 67th Street and Broadway, right at the entrance to the subway. Just before midnight, we woke up and threw on our clothes in the dark and walked down there, still groggy with the heaviness, the blacked out sleep that comes after making love. According to Viking, there was going to be a review. Maybe it'll be terrific. Who knows, I said. Jack said he was doubtful. Still, we could stop by Donnelly's for a beer. We saw the papers come off the truck. The old man at the stand cut the brown cord with a knife, and we bought the one on top of the pile and stood there under a streetlight, turning the pages until we found Books of the Time. I felt dizzy reading Milstein's first paragraph, like going up on a Ferris wheel too quickly and dangling out over space, laughing and gasping at the same time. Jack was silent. After he'd read the whole thing, he said, "It's good, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "It's very, very good." We walked to Donnelly's and spread the paper out on the bar and read the review together, line by line, 2 or 3 more times, like students going over a difficult text for which they sense they're going to be held responsible. The most beautifully executed, the clearest and most important utterance yet made by the generation Kerouac himself named years ago as Beat, and whose principal avatar he is. Just as The Sun Also Rises came to be regarded as the testament of the lost generation, so it seems certain that On the Road will come to be known as that of the Beat generation. It was all very thrilling, but frightening, too. I'd read a lot of reviews in my 2 years in publishing. None of them made pronouncements about history. What would history demand of Jack? What would a generation expect of its avatar? I remember wishing Allen Ginsberg were around to make sense of all this instead of being in Paris. Jack kept shaking his head. He didn't look happy exactly, but strangely puzzled, as if he couldn't figure out why he wasn't happier than he was. When we returned to the apartment to go back to sleep, Jack lay down obscure for the last time in his life. The ringing phone woke him the next morning, and he was famous.
Thank you, Kate. It was beautiful reading Joyce's letters. And the young lady who wrote that, Joyce Johnson, who wrote the letters, is here tonight. And Joyce, if you'd like to stand and be acknowledged, at least. Just want to... Kate, I didn't want to tell you until after you were done reading that. So, thank you, Joyce, for being here, and thanks, Kate, for reading that. Michael, David will probably introduce this piece, I think, better than I would. Michael will be reading the Unhearing Shearing piece. Okay? Let David talk about this.
This, like so much of what Jack wrote, and also Kate, thank you for that read. That was so beautiful. And to see what we affectionately called Sunny Joyce, that was because, not because she was anyone's son, but because she always, like Kate, brought that beatific warmth wherever she was, and in a very dreary time made all of us feel good and worthy when we were considered to be, as they used to say in the vernacular, sort of a group of stumblebums. Joyce always cheered everyone up, but was also a fantastic writer, intellectual scholar, editor, author, and good, warm person herself. So it was great to have you read those beautiful, beautiful words and have Joyce here to hear them. And Shakespeare couldn't make it when they do any of his work in the park where I worked, but Joyce was here, her work read just as beautifully. We all thank you for that, always. And as Michael knows, because he's a wonderful jazz piano player himself, he came and sat in with us and played a Thelonious Monk piece and knocked us out, and that stuff's hard. George Shearing was the person that many of us enjoyed and looked up to when Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell and these monster players were playing jazz that was so difficult. Technically, George Shearing found a way somehow to find his voice in the midst of all that, came all the way over from England and just knocked everybody out because he was tuned in not to copying what other people were doing, but to be himself and have his own voice. And that spirit is still in New York City and always will be. So for those of you who mourn high rents and all that stuff, as Miles Davis so eloquently said in 1959 in his great song, "So what?" Or in the Bible, "This too shall pass," because the beauty, as the greatest bebop poet of all the 19th century, John Keats, said, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever." And the music that George Shearing played is with us tonight.
On hearing Shearing, tempo de funk, gradual crescendo of excitement. Dean and I went to see Shearing at Birdland in the midst of the long, mad weekend. The place was deserted. We were the first customers, 10 o'clock. Shearing came out, blind, led by the hand to his keyboard. He was a distinguished-looking Englishman with a stiff white collar, slightly beefy, blonde, with a delicate English summer's night air about him that came out in the first rippling, sweet number he played, as the bass player leaned to him reverently and thrummed the beat. The drummer, Denzel Best, sat motionless, except for his wrists snapping the brushes. And Shearing began to rock. A smile broke over his ecstatic face. He began to rock on the piano seat back and forth, slowly at first. Then the beat went up, and he began rocking fast. His left foot jumped with every beat. His neck began to rock crookedly. He brought his face down to the keys. He pushed his hair back, and his combed hair dissolved. And he began to sweat. The music picked up. The bass player hunched over and socked it in faster and faster, that's all. Shearing began to play his chords. They rolled out of the piano in great rich showers. You'd think the man wouldn't have time to line them up. They rolled and rolled like the sea. Folks yelled for him to go. Dean was sweating. The sweat poured down his collar. There he is. That's him. Old God Shearing. Yes, yes, yes. And Shearing was conscious of the madman behind him. He could hear every one of Dean's gasps and imprecations. He could sense it, though he couldn't see. That's right, Dean said. Yes. Shearing smiled. He rocked. Shearing rose from the piano, dripping with sweat. These were his great 1949 days before he became cool and commercial. When he was gone, Dean pointed to the empty piano seat. God's empty chair, he said. On the piano, a horn sat. Its golden shadow made strange reflections along the desert caravan painted on the wall behind the drums. God was gone. It was the silence of his departure. It was a rainy night. It was the myth of the rainy night.
Now for our surprise. Erik Lawrence reading a one-page description of the history of jazz, and this is Children of the American Pop Night by Jack Kerouac.
Once, there was Louis Armstrong, blowing his beautiful top in the muds of New Orleans. Before him, the mad musicians who had paraded on official days and broke up the Sousa marches into ragtime. Then there was swing and Roy Eldridge, vigorous and virile, blasting the horn for everything it had. In waves of power and logic and subtlety, leaning into it with glittering eyes and a lovely smile, and sending it out broadcast to rock the jazz world. Then had come Charlie Parker. In his mother's woodshed in Kansas City, blowing his taped up alto among the logs, practicing on rainy days, coming out to watch the old swinging Basie and Benny Moten bands that had Hot Lips Page and the rest. Charlie Parker leaving home and coming into Harlem and meeting the mad Thelonious Monk. And the even madder Gillespie. Charlie Parker, in his early days, when he flipped and walked around in a circle while playing. Somewhat younger than Lester Young, also from KC, that gloomy, saintly goof, in whom the history of jazz was wrapped. For when he held his horn high and horizontal from his mouth, he blew the greatest. As his hair grew longer and he got lazier and stretched out, his horn came halfway down. Till it finally fell all the way. And today he wears his thick-soled shoes so that he can't feel the sidewalks of life. His horn is held weakly against his chest, and he blows cool and easy get-out phrases. Here were the children of the American pop night.
Erik Lawrence. And this is Suzanne Hayes, who at the last minute is coming in and reading an extraordinary meeting of Jack and Neil when they went to hear the great, incredible Slim Galliard, who could speak 17 languages. And if you go on YouTube, you can see here in the 1930s was this fantastic genius, multi-instrumentalist, multilingual originator of a whole way of speaking English in a different way, and an extraordinary musician who ended up moving to London for the last 20 years of his life and being invited to join an exclusive literary club, and met the widow of Neil Cassidy decades after they had been together all the time, and came up to Carolyn, who told me this herself, and remembered her and Neil's favorite tunes from 35 years ago when they were playing at 5 Points at a little place in Denver. He was amazing, and this was an amazing description that Jack, bless his heart, captured for us, and we can all enjoy all these years later what it was like to hang out with the great Slim Galliard way back in 1947.
One night, we suddenly went mad together again. We went to see Slim Galliard in a little Frisco nightclub. Slim Galliard's a tall, thin Negro with big, sad eyes, who's always saying, "Right-a-rooney," and "How about a little bourbon-a-rooney?" In Frisco, great eager crowds of young semi-intellectuals sat at his feet and listened to him on the piano, guitar, and bongo drums. When he gets warmed up, he takes off his undershirt and really goes. He does and says anything that comes into his head. He'll sing "Cement Mixer, Booty, Booty," and suddenly slow down the beat and brood over his bongos with fingertips barely tapping the skin as everybody leans forward breathlessly to hear. You think he'll do this for a minute or so, but he goes right on for as long as an hour, making an imperceptible little noise with the tips of his fingernails, smaller and smaller all the time till you can't hear it anymore, and sounds of traffic come in the open door. Then he slowly gets up and and takes the mic and says very slowly, "Great Rooney, fine Rowdy, hello Rooney, bourbon Rooney, all Rooney. How are the boys in the front row making out with their girls Rooney? Oh Rooney, Rowdy, oh Rooney, Rooney." He keeps this up for 15 minutes, his voice getting softer and softer till you can't hear. His great sad eyes scan the audience. Dean stands in the back saying, "God, yes!" and clasping his hands in prayer and sweating. "Sal, Slim knows time. He knows time." Slim sits down at the piano and hits 2 notes, 2 C's, then 2 more, then 1, then 2. And suddenly, the big burly bass player wakes up from a reverie and realizes Slim is playing C-Jam blues. And he slugs in his big forefinger on the string, and the big booming beat begins, and everybody starts rocking, and Slim just as sad as ever. And they blow jazz for half an hour, and then Slim goes mad and grabs the bongos and plays tremendous rapid Cubana beats and yells crazy things in Spanish, in Arabic, in Peruvian dialect, in Egyptian, in every language he knows. And he knows innumerable languages. Finally, the set's over. Each set takes 2 hours. Slim Galliard goes and stands against a post, looking sadly over everybody's head as people come to talk to him. A bourbon is slipped into his hand. Bourbon Rooney. Thank you, Rowdy. Nobody knows where Slim Galliard is. Dean once had a dream that he was having a baby, and his belly was all bloated up blue, and he lay on the grass at a California hospital. Under a tree with a group of colored men sat Slim Galliard. Dean turned despairing eyes of a mother to him. Slim said, "There you go, Rooney." Now Dean approached him. He approached his God. He thought Slim was God. He shuffled and bowed in front of him and asked him to join us. "Right, Rooney," Slim said. "He'll join anybody, but won't guarantee to be there with you in spirit." Dean got a table, bought drinks, sat stiffly in front of Slim. Slim dreamed over his head. Every time Slim said, "Oh, Rooney," Dean said, "Yes." I sat there with these 2 madmen. Nothing happened. To Slim Galliard, the whole world was just one big Rooney.
Now a special treat after On the Road came out. He wrote Marlon Brando himself, suggesting to Marlon what a wonderful thing would be if he was in the movie of On the Road. And to read that in his inimitable style, Mr. Frank Messina.
Dear Marlon, I'm praying that you'll buy On the Road and make a movie of it. Don't worry about the structure. I know to compress and rearrange the plot a bit to give a perfectly acceptable movie-type structure, making it into one all-inclusive trip instead of the several voyages coast to coast in the book. One vast round trip from New York to Denver to Frisco to Mexico to New Orleans to New York again. I visualize the beautiful shots could be made with the camera on the front seat of the car, showing the road day and night unwinding into the windshield as Sal and Dean yak. I wanted you to play the part because Dean, as you know, is no dopey hot trotter, but a real intelligent, in fact, Jesuit Irishman. You play Dean, and I'll play Sal. Warner Brothers mentioned I play Sal. And I'll show you how Dean acts in real life. You couldn't possibly imagine it without seeing a good imitation. In fact, we can go visit him in Frisco, or have him come down to LA. Still a real frantic cat, but nowadays settled down with his final wife saying the Lord's Prayer with his kitties at night. As you'll see when you read the play, Beat Generation, all I want out of this is to be able to establish myself and my mother a trust fund for life. So I can really go roaming around the world, writing about Japan, India, France, etc. I want to be free to write what comes out of my head and free to feed my buddies when they're hungry and not worry about my mother. Incidentally, my next novel is The Subterraneans, coming out in New York next March. And it's about a love affair between a white guy and a colored girl. It's a very hip story. Some of the characters in it you know in The Village, Stanley Gould, etc. It easily could be turned into a play, easier than On the Road. What I want to do and redo is the theater and cinema in America. Give it a spontaneous dash, remove preconceptions of situation, and let people rave on as they do in real life. That's what the play is. No plot in particular, no meaning in particular. Just the way people are. Everything I write, I do in the spirit where I imagine myself an angel returned to the earth, seeing it with sad eyes it is. I know you approve of these ideas. And incidentally, the new Frank Sinatra show is based on spontaneous too, which is the only way to come on anyway, whether in business or in life. The French movies of the 30s are all still far superior to ours, because the French really let their actors come on, and writers didn't quibble with some preconceived notion of how intelligent the movie audience is. They talked soul from soul, and everybody understood it at once. I want to make great French movies in America. Finally, when I'm rich, American theater and cinema at present is an outmoded dinosaur that ain't mutated along with the best in American literature. If you really want to go ahead, make arrangements to see me in New York. Or if you're going to Florida, here I am. But what we should do is talk about this, because I prophesy that it's going to be the beginning of something real great. I'm bored nowadays, and I'm looking around for something to do in the world anyway. Writing novels is getting too easy. Same with plays. I wrote the play in 24 hours. Come on now, Marlon. Put up your dukes and write. Sincerely, later, Jack Kerouac.
Is there time? Okay. This will be a very brief version. I was going to do all that so to show our good taste and not go over time. The great Clarence Frogman Henry used to say he ended just like when you conduct a symphony orchestra. If the second hand goes 1 second later, you're finished and the orchestra goes bankrupt. So I learned to be prompt. And Clarence Frogman Henry in New Orleans, he would watch that old second hand and he'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the old clock up on the wall says it's quitting time, you all." So we'll do a very brief version. I want to thank the Cathedral for doing this. Hope that they can do this every year. And for all old friends of Jack Kerouac, I never thought this would happen in such elegant surroundings. And I know Jack would appreciate it, and we appreciate your being here too. This would be the relatively short version. Well, here we are at the Theater of the Saint Divine itself. And as we mentioned earlier, you could put the self-help videos on someone else's shelf. St. John the Divine was really on time, and knew that when we were going down the line, we would feel so fine to be here with all of you tonight and share this moment with us. And for those who don't believe it, you can go on the now very popular Negativity bus. It leaves from Greyhound Station every second, don't you know? But unfortunately, the one that's the positive bus is not quite as often here, and sometimes people consider it to be too slow. But it's the only bus to catch if you want to have a joyous life of your own. And if you do, then you can invite anybody to wherever you are, which makes your home. And with that thought in mind, for all of humankind, we're going to end it on time by saying that you can write a better song like this and don't have to worry whether it has any reason or any rhyme, because letting your mind free is only the way to have the spontaneity flow out. And that's what creativity, whether it's hard work or just for fun, is all about. Now, when I go home, I'm going to spend 3 hours working on 2 measures of my latest symphony, but I'll be inspired by all the beautiful readings tonight and all the creativity that flows in this place, in this very amazing space, so full of joy and fear. Only fear that you might not get it right, because then you know that the end is near. But when you see that the end of the road is only a bump, because there's no further part than that, you can realize that really what it is about is only where it's at. And as Charlie Parker himself said long ago, now's the time, because now was, is, and always will be the right time. When you're on down that line, you can take your creativity with you, we hope, and when you go home tonight, you can listen, you can act, you can think, you can sing, you can even sit down and write. And if you do, you can write a better song like this, I hope, for your sake, because we only did it for fun. And when you do stuff for fun, that's where creativity starts, and that's where creativity comes from. So people who rhyme compulsively like this are usually considered to be certifiably crazy. So before they take me away to the nearest mental health program, I'll only say tonight for all of you, thank you. And that's the introduction in a very brief, modest, and untime-consuming way for Jack's old song that Neil Cassidy, Allen Ginsberg, and I wrote in 1959 called Pull My Daisy. Pull my daisy, tip my cup, all my doors are open. Hop my heart for coconuts, all my eggs are broken. Harp my heart song, harp my light, seraphs hold me steady. Hit my angel, harp my light, lay it on the lady. Harp my heart song, harp my light, seraphs hold me steady. Hip my angel, harp my light, lay it on the needy. Well, Jack here tonight at the Cathedral, year 2018, he'd realize that he's still the voice of the present and the future, not a has-been. To have him rejoice, and all of you join in this place before we are through. We only want to thank you for coming tonight. Yeah, your presence is verily out of sight. Since brevity's the soul of wit, you'll be relieved to know that's just about it. There's not too much more that I've got to say. We got a young man here, Erik Lawrence is gonna play. my doors are open. Hot my heart for coconuts, all my eggs are broken. Hop my heart's on harp my life, sorrows hold me steady. Hit my angel harp my light, lay it on the needy. Harp my heart's on harp my life, sorrows hold me steady. Hit my angel harp my light, lay That's the way they used to scat sing here uptown, way back in what they call in the vernacular the year 2008, back in that day. And Jack used to go up to Mittens in Harlem way before he came to Columbia, and you would hear what the great artists of that time have encouraged everyone all these years later to still do. So for all of you here who came tonight to celebrate Jack, let's sure that we get the memories and the information right. That the young son of Arnold Lawrence is Erik Lawrence, in case anyone's here seemed to forget that fact. And it's so that we got the correct information back. And Jack himself, who always paid attention to everything everybody did say, learned when he was a young boy and still was out every afternoon at 6 years old, beginning to play. Only spoke French to his father at home when he used to sit with him alone long before he went to school. And his father used to say to him, mon cher Jacques, si tu restes sous ton habit sûrement tu seras obligé comme ta mère à travailler toute la vie dans une factory. Which meant the son, you better get out of town and get yourself some type of gig using a football football skills and those thrills that you and Jude and others, and your A average and all those books you took out of the Lowell Library and read. If you don't believe it's not just what I said, it's in the Burr collection of the New York Public Library. You can see his old library card and see how many books he used to know. That's why when we did those first jazz poetry readings in New York City so long ago, we never knew whether he was reading Victor Hugo, who said, je vais t'essayer dans son phare quelques distances, dans le cadre de la Niagara, bientôt j'ai vu dans toutes les salles, tout le beau spectacle dans la nuit, dans la noche, etc. Or whether or not he was just making it up freestyle or taking Racine or Baudelaire or someone else that he didn't really care to even acknowledge because he liked their work so much. And finally, when Jack got a scholarship to Horace Mann, it seemed to be the best thing that any young fella from Lowell, Massachusetts, way back then possibly could do, or even today can. And with his high football skills, which are still in the record books, along with his outstanding academic achievements, got accepted to highly prestigious nearby the old Cathedral, Columbia U. And with his ivy-covered excellence, all the people alone were so astounded that a gold Lowell boy from a little French Canada was able to have something that they never thought that any of them could do. Well, the third week of practice, he broke his leg and he was too proud to beg, so for the next 7 years he went out. Had every type of imaginable day job possible, and no one expected that scroll and the great big role that he had on the road. And finally, in the year 2007, it finally came out. And all of us who read Gilbert Milstein's fantastic review were so thrilled that we only could pray and thank heavens as well as shout. And Joyce, who's here tonight, wrote about that so beautifully in her book. And if you haven't read Minor Characters or all the other books she's written, which are so many have nothing to do with Jack Kerouac, but about her brilliance as a writer, please, when you go home tonight, try to give them a look. And some people, after reading Gilbert's review, were so pathologically jealous they didn't know what to do. And Truman Capote in his great white coat, even though he was such a great writer himself, went on the John Wingate show and said it wasn't writing, it was typing. And now old Truman's still sitting in the same TV show in the same white suit all these years later with John Wingate up on the great PTV channel of heaven complaining and griping. So for anyone here at St. John the Divine, when you go home, you can certainly have the time just to appreciate what you do yourself and what everyone else you know does too. And don't let pathological jealousy, the major disease of the 21st century, get to you. So in the interest of all that, we hope you go home and have as much fun as we've had tonight being with all of you and celebrate your own creativity. And don't forget to pull your day